Hello imbibers, a very good evening to all of you. Once again, we are here to discuss the agents of pollination, another topic from the sexual reproduction in flowering plants. As you know that we have started with the very first chapter of your 12th standard, which is the reproduction in the angiosperm, or you can say the flowering plants, and we have actually completed so many chapters, so many topics, sorry, not chapters, topics related to the sexual reproduction in flowering plants. Once again, we are here with the another topic called the agents of pollination. Yes, before we describe the fertilization events, before we describe about the other post fertilization events, the very most important thing of the pollination is how exactly the pollen reaches to the stigma. What are the various methods, what are the various agents involved in this kind of a transfer of the pollen grain to the stigma. So, we are going to discuss that in the today's session. Before we start, let me introduce you to myself. I am Anam. I will be your botany expert for the session 2023 and 2024. Like we have been discussing all the topics related to the botany, and we will be discussing all that in the future also. So, please join us on the Embibe app. There we have so many things all at one place in the Embibe app. You can learn, you can test yourself, you can see how much you have achieved, and you can basically attend all the live classes. They are scheduled over there and have a very good experience of answering questions throughout the Embibe app while I take the session. Okay, so moving forward with that today's session, talking about the agents of pollination, the very first thing we have in our mind is that in this chapter, all the topics which have been already covered and which we basically covered today, there is a lecture 2 related to the pollination. Yes, we are going to discuss about the agents of pollination. We have discussed about the male reproductive part, the female reproductive part, and we have also discussed about the microsporogenesis and the megasporogenesis also. Yes. Moving forward, children, today we are going to discuss about the concept related to the cover would be related to anemophily, hydrophily, and of course the entomophily, the few agents which are absolutely important for the pollination to take place. Yes. So, children, talking about the agents of a pollination, what do you mean by agent? Yes, agent or a vector or a mediator, a person, not exactly a person, a thing which is basically moving or transferring the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. Yes, a pollinator. A pollinator is an agent that causes the pollination, and the pollinators could be everything. Through the pollinators could be physical and could be abiotic like air and water. Yes, agents could be anyone. The air and water could be the pollinators. The air and water could be needed for the transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma. They are the abiotic agents. Yes, what are the biotic agents? The insects, the birds, the bats and other animals which are basically transferring the pollen grains from the anther and stigma also act as an agents, also act as a pollinator, and these are called as biotic because they are living agents. So, the agent of pollination could be everyone. Yes, especially the biotic factor could be and the abiotic factor could be. All of them are just trying so that the right type of a pollen could be transferred from one anther to the stigma, and the germination could take place, the fertilization could take place, and we could get good fruits out of it. Yes, the whole soul reality, the whole sole reason of the pollination is that only. So, let us see what are the agents we have in our today's session. Talking about the agents of pollination, the very first thing you know that 75% of the plant species need a help of a pollinator for the transfer of pollen grain. Yes, many species, many species, especially 75% of the plant species, which is a major number, which is a grand number, need a pollinator, need an agent for the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. Yes, as you know, children, if there is no pollen transformation, if there is no pollen transfer, there will be no fertilization, there would be no pollen tube formation, there will be no fertilization, there will be no formation of fruit or seed, etc. XYZ, there is no formation of a new generation also. So, children, it is absolutely important for the pollinators to fertilize, to carry these from the anther to the stigma. Yes, so 75% in general, you know, they are totally responsible on they have this responsibility towards the agents. The agents need to carry these pollen grains and transfer these pollen grains. So talking about the abiotic agents, if you know children, abiotic means non-living agents. The small proportion of plant use abiotic agents. A very small proportion of the plant uses the abiotic agent. You know, those are air and water. So as you know children, we have discussed about the pollen allergy also. So where are these pollens? The pollens are in the air. Yes, they might be helping in the pollination but also causing us allergy. People who are very much sensitive towards the pollen allergy, yes, they can cause bronchitis also, we have discussed that. But through air also, the air also act as an agent of pollination, agent or a pollinator also, which is called the abiotic factor of the pollination. And yet you know, through water also, basically the water also act as a agent in which the male gametes could basically swim, go to the female, yes, and basically led to the fertilization events. So two biotic agents are absolutely important, air and water. Yes, talking about the other agents of pollination, next we have the anemophily. Now we are starting with the biotic agents. So the very first thing comes into the biotic agent is the anemophilus. Yes, the anemophilus about the abiotic agent. Talking about the abiotic agent, since we are discussing about the air, water, the other abiotic agent, I just got confused with the entomophily, anemophily. Anemophily is totally the pollination by the winds. Yes, through the winds. Winds are the abiotic. Yes, they are the abiotic. Yes, and it is absolutely very common. You know, flowers are not very colorful. Some plants have flowers which are not very colorful and they are not attracting the insects, they are not attracting the other animals, yes, for the nectar. So what they use is the wind as a method of pollination. Yes, they not produce nectar, yes, they are not producing nectar, so why would any animal would come to suck the nectar? So they are not producing nectar, they are not beautiful, they are not having good flowers, so the wind will act as a pollinating agent, and those plants in which the wind will act as a pollinating agent or as a pollinator, those are called anemophilous plants, or anemophily will take place. So pollen grains are generally lightweighted and they are non-sticky, well exposed. Some plants have well exposed stamens. Yes, you know, yes, chasmogamous plants. Yes or no? The chasmogamous plants have the stamens exposed to the outer environment so that it is easy for them to disperse their pollen grains. So some plants which have exposed stamens can easily disperse the pollen grains into the air. Yes, large often feathery stigma. Can you see this? Large often feathery stigma is basically receiving the pollen grain easily. Single ovule in each ovary. Such plants, such flowers which have such kind of a stigma, they also have one ovule, single ovule, and single ovule in each ovary. Yes, the flowers packed into an inflorescence. Yes, the flowers is totally packed in the inflorescence, have petals, sepals, corolla, calyx, and whatever you say, it is basically packed in an inflorescence. And such kind of anemophilous plants are maize and grasses. Yes, the pollination in the maize, in the grasses is through the wind. The anemophily act over there, led to the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma in the maize and the grass. Yes, what is anemophily? The pollination through the winds. Yes, it is most common, especially in the flowers which are not attractive, they do not have nectar. Yes, that is basically common in such kind of a plants. Yes, they have well exposed stamens, they have this feathery stigma which can easily capture the pollen grain, and they have just one ovule inside the ovary for the fertilization. And the examples of anemophilous plants are maize and the grass. Clear? I really hope this is clear. Yes. Moving forward to the other biotic agents, next we have hydrophily. The other method of abiotic transfer is the water, and the agent, when the water is acting as an agent for the transport of pollen grains from anther to the stigma, we call it as hydrophily. What is hydro? Water? Yes. Hydrophily is when the water is acting as a pollinating agent. Yes, in this rare flowering plants are present and which is totally restricted to 30 genera and mostly monocots. Yes, the pollination through the water is mainly restricted to 30 genera and totally restricted to monocots. Monocots are what? They have the single cotyledon which gives rise to a shoot system and a root system. You must have gone through this in the morphology of flowering plants. Okay, next, the pollen grains are long and ribbon like. Yes, the pollen grains of such plants which are basically using as a water as a pollinating agent, they are having ribbon like structure for their movement. Okay, ribbon like pollen grains are present so that they can basically reach towards the stigma. The pollen grain have mucilaginous covering. Why mucilaginous covering? So that it cannot, the water cannot get inside it. It is basically having this covering to be water resistant. The mucilaginous covering in the pollen grains of the water is basically to be water resistance. Again, the flowers are not very colorful, but they also do not produce nectar. The other reason to basically have this abiotic agent as a pollinator, that it does not also produce nectar and their flowers are also not very colorful. The examples of, yes, we have gone through that, you have studied in the 11th standard, examples of such kind of pollination occurs in algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes, Vallisneria, hydra and zostera. These few algae, bryophytes, you know algae, they have this flagella in their particular what? The male gametophyte have the flagella, they can swim, and yet they also have the, in bryophytes we call them as amphibians of plant kingdom because they basically use what? They use the water for the pollination. That is why. So children, the pollination through the water is basically common in such kind of plants, and the reasons have been already given. The reason is that they have color, they do not have colors basically, and they do not have colors, they do not have nectar. Okay, so they do not have colors, they do not have nectar. So the reason the hydrophily, the whole pollination through the water is happening is also the reasons because they do not have a nectar in their flowers are not very attractive. Yes, so this is the other reason of pollination. There is other pollinator, abiotic pollinator or abiotic agent, which is the water, and the water when act as a pollinating agent, we call it as hydrophily to take place. What we have gone through? We have gone through the anemophily. We have also discussed the hydrophily. Let's see what we have next, talking about the other pollinating agents. Next we have hydrophily in Vallisneria. So children, as you can see, this is a male flower, this is a female flower, and this is the stigma. Yes, and this is the female flower. Children, basically the pollen from the whole male flower will go to the stigma and basically land on the stigma and do the fertilization, form the pollen tube, reaches to the ovule or the ova for the fertilization. Yes, and the method here for the transfer of pollen grains through the anther, from the anther to the stigma, is the water. That is why it is called as hydrophily. Next children, next we have the other biotic agents. Talking about the other biotic agents, children, what are biotic agents? The living animals, the living agents which are responsible for the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma is called the biotic agents. Yes, what are the agents? They could be reptiles, it could be rodents, it could be insects, it could be bats, it could be anyone. Yes, they're just acting as a pollen transfer agents. Yes, majority of the plant uses biotic agent for the pollination. Why? Because majority of the flowers, when they are attractive, they have this nectar inside it. A lot of insects, the lot of particular bats, all are basically attracted towards them to suck the nectar, and in turn what plant do? Plant get their particular pollen grain transfer from the anther to the stigma. They use them as a pollinator. Just like insects, birds and bats are common agents, bees, you know, bees suck the nectar and they make honey. This is what they do. So bees are the most dominating biotic agent for the pollen transfer. Yes, you know, the bees are basically always around the flower to suck the nectar. They basically use it for creating the honey also. So children, that is why the bee is the most important and dominating pollinating agent. Some primates, arboreal rodents and even reptiles are also acting as a pollinators. So biotic pollinators are majorly the insects, the bees, yes, the bats also act as a pollinating agent, snails also act as a pollinating agent, yes, some rodents also acting as a pollinating agent, so also reptiles also acting as a pollinating agent. So if any animal is acting as a pollinator, is acting, helping in the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma, in that we call it as biotic agents of pollination. Yes, moving forward, talking more about the biotic agent, next we have the entomophily. Yes, what is entomophily, children? In the entomophily, the pollination is strictly by the insects. Yes, the other biotic agent, which is the insects. So insects come near the flower for the nectar. In turn, they basically, the pollen grain gets stick to their particular body, and when they reach to the other flower, other female flower, for sucking the nectar, the pollen grain go and basically shed at their place for the fertilization. In this kind of an entomophily, large and colorful, fragrant, rich nectar is basically present. The flowers are small and then clustered into an inflorescence. Animals are attracted to color and fragrance. Flies and beetles are attracted by foul odors, and nectar and pollen grains are the floral reward. So children, many of the abiotic agent, many of the insects are totally attracted by the fragrance, good fragrance and the color of the flower. But there are many other agents also which are not attracted towards good odor, they are attracted to the foul odor, and these are flies and beetles. They are not attracted towards the good odor, they are attracted towards the bad odor also. So they are also helping as a pollinating agent, just like the other animals are acting as a pollinating agent. Because of the fragrance and because of the color, they suck the nectar. In turn, when they act as a pollinating agent, they get rewarded with what? They get rewarded with the pollen grains and the floral reward. Yes, they even don't know they are acting as a pollinator, but yet they are getting what? Rewards. They are getting in turn the pollen grains, they are getting the floral nectar. Yes, so entomophily is a basically method of transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma through the insects. Yes, we have insects as a pollinating agent. Next we have pollination in Amorphophilus. What is Amorphophilus? Amorphophilus is a plant in which the pollination is because of the insects, and children, the plant provides a safe place for the insect to lay their eggs and a floral reward. Yes, Amorphophilus is a plant which is basically providing a area or space for the insect to they can lay their eggs, and in turn they basically getting the pollen grains for the transfer from the anther to the other stigma and for the fertilization. So basically they are getting the space to lay their eggs also, and in turn they are basically getting a reward for pollination. Yes, so Amorphophilus is a plant which is pollination by insects takes place. Next we also have the pollination in yucca plant, which is also very popular. In this, if you can see, this is a yucca plant. In this, children, a pollination is by the moth. By the moth, it shows mutualism. What would the mutualism? Both of the parties would be benefited from each other. Yes, one will help in the pollination, the other will basically give them space. Yes, moth and yucca plant, we cannot complete their life cycle without each other. Yes, they are so dependent on each other to complete their life cycle that if they are not in contact with each other, if they are not having this mutual relationship, their life cycle would be incomplete. So in yucca plant, the pollination is by the moth. Yes, they give basically shelter, they also lay their eggs, and children in turn they get the pollen grains for the pollination. Next we have the pollination by birds also. The birds also do the pollination. Yes, that pollination, when the birds are doing such kind of pollination, that is what you call ornithophyly. Ornithophyly is a pollination through birds. So how do birds pollinate? Yes, why do birds help in pollination? There's a brightly colored flowers and the odorless flowers, and they are energy rich in nectars and they are day blooming flowers. So children, the birds are attracted towards this nectar and they are basically very blooming in the daylight. Yes, but they do not have any odor. Birds are not attracted towards the odor. They are attracted towards this bright color and this blooming flowers. Yes, because they are very rich in nectar. So the birds come for the nectar towards the plant, towards the flower, and in turn they get the pollen grains. Yes, such kind of an examples where the ornithophyly takes place is the sunbirds and the hummingbirds. These are the two examples of the ornithophyly in which the pollination occurs through the birds. And birds are totally attracted to the flowers which are very colored, very blooming, yes, in the daylight, and yet they do not have a good odor, but they are very energy rich in nectar. So the birds helps in pollination in these particular plants. Yes, so as you can see children, how many agents, since 75% of the species of the plants are totally dependent on the agents for the transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma. That is the reason this is basically happening. Yes, every particular agent is responsible for the pollination, for the fertilization to takes place. Be it insects, be it birds, be it moth, be it any particular air, water, wind, everything is acting as an agent or acting as a pollinator. Clear? I hope this is clear. Yes, moving forward, talking more about the pollination, next we have a question for you. Both autogamy and geitonogamy are prevented by, how you think the autogamy and geitonogamy could be prevented? We have discussed about this autogamy and geitonogamy. Yes, in which particular plant the autogamy and geitonogamy are prevented? Yes. Any answers to this? Both autogamy and geitonogamy are prevented in what? Both autogamy and geitonogamy is prevented in the papaya plant. Yes, papaya plant do not promote the autogamy and geitonogamy. Next, example of epihydrophily. What is the example of epihydrophily? What is the example of hydrophily? Just now we have discussed about it. Yes. So this is children, this ability to answer through the Embibe app, it is an amazing. I know through YouTube you cannot answer it. So you can join us on the Embibe app and you can answer directly through the Embibe app. Yes, the app gives you an ability to answer directly using your laptop, using your cursor, using your phones also. So children, you can answer through that. Yes. Which example of hydrophily? Simple. Hydrophily is the pollination through the water. Water is responsible. The water is acting as an agent for the pollination. The transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma is through the water, and among which them basically the hydrophily is taking place. Just now we have discussed about it. Yes, the answer would be the Vallisneria is basically responsible, the water is responsible in the Vallisneria for the pollination. The pollinating agent in the Vallisneria is the water, and that is why it is called as hydrophily. Next question. Even in the absence of pollinating agents, seed settings is assured in. Even if there is no pollinating agent, the seed set would be assured in. It means there is no fertilization taking place. Yes, but the seed set would remain same because there is no fertilization. All the ovules will convert into a seed. Yes, in which basically the absence of pollinating agent Salvia, fig, Commonilla, zostera. Anyone can answer this? Which among them without even pollinating agent acts as a seed setting assured in? Yes, the answer would be the common lina is the plant in which the seed set is assured. Next, pollination in yucca takes place through, just now we have discussed about this. Pollination in yucca plant is taking place through which? Yes, quickly, very simple, just now we have discussed about it. The pollination in the yucca plant takes place through what? And they cannot survive without each other, they cannot complete their life cycle without each other. Just now we have discussed about this. Yes, anyone? Very simple, this is so simple, just now we have discussed. The pollination in yucca plant is not possible because of the moth. The moth and yucca plant show mutualism, they are both benefited from each other. Next, ornithophily takes place in, ornithophily is the pollination in which the pollinating agent is the birds. Ornithophily is basically taking place in what? Just now we discussed the features of the plant in which the ornithophily is basically taking place. Yes. The answer would be the yellow flowers having nectaries. Ornithophily will take place in this. So children, this is all about the today's session. We have discussed about the pollinating agents. We have discussed about the abiotic agents, which is air, water, wind. We have discussed about the biotic agents. It could be birds, it could be insects, which could be bees. Yes, we have discussed about everything. The pollinating agents could be biotic and abiotic. They get rewards from the flower, they get nectars from the flower, and in turn the flower use them for the pollination, for the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. Yes, this is all we have learned. We have learnt about the agents of pollination. But before you go children, next we have the next session which we will discuss about, do you know what favors cross pollination? Yes, we are going to discuss about the fertilization events, we are going to discuss about the fertilization. So, the cross pollination is basically favors, yes, favors what exactly what favors the cross pollination, we will discuss about that also. And children, before you go, let me introduce you to this. This is an Embibe app. You can log in through your email ID, your phone number, you will land on this page. What you have to do, just click on the side button, go for your respective board, it be CBSE, and you click on the respective 12th standard, select your language, and done, you'll land on this page. And as you click, you'll press the home button. All the Embibe live classes basically will be scheduled, will be present over here. Yes, all the upcoming classes are basically over here, and then examples, all the next week classes are also here. And next children, this is another amazing app. You can basically go and download this, scan the text and it will show you, highlight the keyword and will show you everything in 3D. We will meet again with the another topic of sexual reproduction in flowering plants. Until then, keep imbibing. Take care. Bye bye.
Keep imbibing. We believe in you.